Welcome to the ADF Insider Basic Series. This series demonstrates the basic skills that you will require for working with JDeveloper and building ADF applications. Today's demonstration is a Don't Panic guide to the JDeveloper IDE. For some developers, moving to JDeveloper, the overall IDE can feel very overwhelming. Windows appear to open and close by magic, shrink and expand as if they're possessed by demons. And it feels like there's 100 different windows all showing a huge amount of information. For beginners, this can be rather confusing. Today we're going to attempt to reduce that confusion for beginner programmers. We're going to discuss what an IDE or an integrated development environment is. Then we're going to talk about some basic skills for managing the windows within the JDeveloper IDE. And then finally talk about the windows themselves and what they're contained and used for. In considering the term IDE or Integrated Development Environment, IDEs have been around for a very long time. In fact, the first IDE came out in 1975. They are designed to assist developers with their day-to-day programming efforts. Several notable historic IDEs include Turbo Pascal, GNU Emacs, and of course Oracle's JDeveloper. Ultimately, an IDE is a tool for programmers and developers. At minimum, an IDE includes a text editor, a compiler, and a debugger all within the one tool. This provides a significant advantage as it allows programmers to stay within the one environment, not flipping between an editor and a command line for compiling a program, or reading the output of an error log file, then trying to compare the line numbers with a separate source code file in a text editor. Contemporary IDEs, such as JDeveloper, go way beyond these limited set of features. But today, we're not going to discuss all the thousands of features. Rather, we're going to focus on managing the JDeveloper IDE windows and looking at what those windows provide to us. In terms of managing the JDeveloper IDE and all the windows that are contained within it, we're going to look at the features of docking, drag and drop, minimizing and maximizing, and resetting the layout. One of the features of the JDeveloper IDE is developers can rearrange the windows to suit their own needs. This is done through a docking mechanism. If we have a look at the application navigator here on the left-hand side, we select it, then left select and drag. You'll notice as I drag it around, a blue box appears. This is the docking feature of the windows, and the blue box indicates where the window wants to dock to. So for example, with the application navigator at the moment, if I wanted to dock it to the left of the structure window, you can see it snaps to this left location. I let go, and now that we can see, the application navigator is now to the left of the structure window. Alternatively, I could drag the application navigator right over to the right-hand side of the display, snap, and now you see that it's all the way over here to the right of the start page and ultimately the structure window. If I bring it back over and drop it in the middle of the structure window, so you see the blue box snapping to the center, the two windows now stack. So rather than having two windows on the screen at the same time, they're actually stacked on top of each other. If I wanted to return this to its original spot, simply I drag it to the top. If at any time the layout of the windows gets messy or I rearrange them and now I can't actually work out where the windows are, I can just go to the Windows menu and reset Windows to factory settings, which puts all the windows back in the original locations. Another useful feature of the JDeveloper IDE is the ability to drag windows outside of the main IDE, particularly useful when you have dual head displays. So to demonstrate, what I'm going to do here is to partially minimize the JDeveloper IDE and drag the application navigator window outside the main IDE window. Notice that it can actually float outside of this main window and it still operates as normal. It's a fully active window. If I want to get that window back into the main JDeveloper spot, I can just drag it back in. Note that feature is only applicable to all the peripheral windows that appear in JDeveloper. You cannot drag the main document windows out of the main IDE. They need to stay within this main large MDI type window. While some of us are lucky to have dual head displays with lots of screen real estate, others who are working on limited displays, such as those with laptops, sometimes having all the windows open in the IDE, you barely can see anything on the very small displays. So JDeveloper also assists laptops users to rearrange windows to take up a smaller amount of screen real estate. If you notice the Application Navigator window here, we can simply minimize it, and we can do the same with the Structure window. And you can see both those windows now appear in a left bar on the side of the IDE. And as I float my mouse over them, you can see the contents of each. If at any point I decide that I don't want the window there and I'd like to restore it to its factory settings, essentially I just click on this double square restore icon and it puts it back where the window originally was located. If at any other point during the use of the IDE I find that I can't see all the details in one of the windows, you also have the facility to quickly maximize a window to take up all the screen real estate. This is done by double-clicking on the tab. Once you've seen all the content within that window and you're fine with what you're doing, then you just simply double-click on the tab again and it will go back to its original size. Alternatively, you can right-click and say Maximize and right-click and say Restore. You also have the facility to split the main document windows and have two views onto the same document. To undo the split, you simply right-click Unsplit Document. Now that we discussed managing the windows in the JDeveloper IDE, let's talk about the windows, what they contain and what they're used for. Now, we're not going to discuss all the windows in the JDeveloper IDE, but we're going to discuss some of the main ones, and they are the Application Navigator, the main document window, or what's sometimes called the editor, component palette, the structure window, the log window, and the property palette. So in front of us, we have all the windows that would be open while we're developing an application. So let's try and identify each window so you know what they do and where they are. The first window on the left-hand side is the Application Navigator, and it's designed to give you a hierarchical view on top of all the source code files in your actual application. The second most important window is the document or the editor windows. Now, these typically appear in the center of the overall layout of the JDeveloper IDE, and it's here where you'll be doing things like WYSIWYG layouts for web pages or actually coding and typing in an editor. To the right-hand side of the main document windows is the component palette. And the component palette basically, depending on what you're doing in the main document windows, has all the components for the current document window that you can simply drag and drop into that document window. Similar to the component palette, which is designed to assist you with working with the main document and editor windows, is the structure window, which typically appears in the bottom left-hand side. Now, this is another hierarchical type view of your application, but it's designed to be a hierarchical type view of the document window. So, for instance, with web pages, they're typically a hierarchical view of XML content, and the structure window helps you understand that hierarchical view visually rather than diving into the code. Another window that is designed to support the main document window is the property inspector. Basically a whole bunch of key value pairs of properties for the selected item in the main document window. Finally, the log window, as you can guess, basically gives you informational messages, maybe errors, maybe warnings, maybe just other information type messages that are displayed while either you're developing or running your application. Overall, these windows are the main windows which you'll use while developing an ADF application. So what may have seemed overwhelming at the beginning with lots and lots of windows, there's really only 6 main windows that you will work with within the JDeveloper IDE. The Application Navigator window is a hierarchical view onto the source code of your application. Essentially a file system-like view of all the files that make up your application that you'll be working with when you build your actual end product for your customers. The application navigator is made up of projects, application resources, data controls, and recently opened files. Each of these is accessible via an accordion control. The projects contains your source code, application resources, your connections to things such as databases, and application-wide configuration files. The data controls section includes drag and droppable model components onto your web pages, and the recently opened files gives you quick access to files that you've recently been working with. Here we have a live application navigator. Now the first thing the application navigator provides is a list of all the currently open applications. Now I only have one, so I can select it. In addition, we can open other applications or create a new application. Or alternatively, we can go to this other drop-down menu option and go through the new gallery to do the same thing. You'll see in this particular set of options that we have facilities to manipulate the projects, the application, version the application, do things like compare files and bring up the application properties. As a sideline, the application menu at the top also has a number of these options. Within the application navigator with the projects accordion control open, we can see all the files within the actual application categorized by projects. If we double click on any one of these particular options, it will open the associated file in the document or associated editor. If we close the projects accordion, we can see the application resources with the database connections, data controls, and recently opened files. Within the projects accordion control, we've got buttons for opening project properties, refreshing the view, creating working sets, which are effectively filters, very useful when we have too many files to show in the application navigator, so we can shrink down the set that we can see, and some options for just changing the default views of the projects. So for instance, sorting all your icons by type. There is one other set of options, basically the right-click options, which provides more options in context of what you're currently doing. So for example, when I go to the model project and I click on the model package here, it brings up some context-sensitive options for creating ADF business components in this example. The document window, sometimes called the editor windows, is the main area of the JDeveloper IDE where you're actually changing the source code and the files associated with your projects and application. JDeveloper provides a number of different visual editors and source code editors which are beyond the scope of this actual presentation. However, needless to say, rather than just being a text editor coupled with the IDE, Oracle has taken great care to provide you, in many cases, visual editors to make working with the underlying source codes much more fast and productive rather than spending all your time as a programmer typing code. In order to bring up a document or editor window, what we do is we double-click on a file in the application navigator, and this will open the associated document or editor window in the main central part of the JDeveloper IDE. The first thing to notice about the document or editor window is that the file name is represented in the top of the tab of the current window. Secondly, one of the most important features of the document or editor windows are these tabs that are aligned horizontally on the bottom: Design, Source, Bindings, Preview, and History. These provide you different ways of looking at the current document. So at the moment I'm looking at the WYSIWYG, or the what you see is what you get design view of this web page, but alternatively I can switch to the source code view, which gives me all the text behind this actual file, which I can happily edit as much as I can drag and drop components around in the main design window. The bindings view is used for associating the bindings from the model layer through the data control palette, not really something we will discuss in this particular presentation. The preview view gives you a very quick representation of the web page at runtime. Not particularly good in the current JDeveloper, but this will be improving in later releases. And also the history view. And the history view is important because what it does is it shows you all the different versions of the files that you've recently saved. It can be hooked up with tools like Subversion. And in particular, when we click on previous versions, it will actually give us a visual representation of the changes between that previous version and the current file. In terms of these bottom tabs, which you choose to use is up to you. If you find working in the WYSIWYG view editor easier, then certainly work there. But if you find you'd rather be coding, then go to the source code view editor. It's all synchronized, the IDE will keep it all in sync for you, and you can use whichever you prefer. When you look at the design and source code views, you'll notice both of them have a breadcrumb trail at the bottom. And basically, the rightmost component is the one that you currently have selected, and all the components to the left are the parents of that component. So as example, if I click Find Employees, which is an output text control, you can see that now selected. And if I want to go back up to its parent panelist or panel box, when I select that, you can see it's now highlighted in the main document window. From here, some other things that are important to understand about this particular document window is, as example, if I drag in, let's say, another output text control, and drop it under Find Employees, you can see the new component added, and in addition, you can see that the tab for this particular document window is now italics. And this indicates that the file is currently unsaved and needs to be saved in order to save the changes for later use. Finally, in terms of tab management, if we end up in a situation where we have too many windows open, so let me open a few, okay, we start to end up in a situation where navigating backwards and forwards of the tabs is difficult. That's where these arrow buttons come in. They allow us to work backwards, or I should say left to right, of the tabs that are actually open. Alternatively, you can click this drop-down box and now you can select any one of the tabs. And you can do that via the window menu as well. If you realize you've got far too many tabs open and you want to close the others, you can go right-click, close others, and alternatively, you can do right-click, close all, and that will close all the tabs. The component palette is designed to show you all the components that you can drag and drop into the structure window or the main document and editor window. It is basically broken up into a number of accordion controls that categorize the number of components available via the current component library that you have selected. The component palette displays all the component libraries that are available for your current document window. So for instance, here I'm editing a ADF Faces web page, so we can see that the ADF Faces component library is selected. You can see the other options that I have, but at the moment I'll stick with ADF Faces. Within context of the ADF Faces component library, you can see that it's divided into categories or accordion controls, which show multiple different components. The problem with the components is there can sometimes be hundreds of these, and finding the relevant component can be difficult. So this search facility at the top allows you to quickly do a quick search through the current component library, returning all the components that have, well, in this case, the word output in its name. Once you have the component that you're interested in, so in my case, let's go with the button component, you can then simply drag and drop that component into the actual document window. So I'm going to drag this button into this facet called Global Search. See, that button has been added, and not only can I drag those buttons or these components into the document window, but I can do the same thing in the source code. So here I am dragging another button into the same Global Search facet. The structure window gives you a hierarchical visual view of the current document editor window that you're working with. It is synchronized with the document window and the property inspector such that if you select an item in the main window, in the main document window, it will be reflected in the structure window, and vice versa, if you select components within the structure window, that selection will also be reflected in the document window. Within the structure window, it supports drag and drop, so you can pick up components and move them around in the structure window, and that will be reflected in the main document window as well. Similar to the component palette, the structure window is designed to support the main document window. So as example, the structure window, as I click particular elements or components within the structure window, you can see that they are actually selected also in the document window and even the breadcrumb trail down here. Similar to the document window, we can also drag and drop components from the component palette straight into the structure window. So now you can see the output text to control here and the output text to control up there. So pretty much everything is synchronized. Alternatively, if I was to drag and drop items within the structure window, you can see that the document window has reflected that, the rearrangement of the output text controls. The structure window itself provides some facilities like pinning. So now this structure window, regardless of what we do in the document window, will stay in this particular view. We'll be looking at this particular web page, and then we can in fact spawn another structure window which can still be dynamic. This is useful when we want to compare two sets of structures. The pinning allows us to keep one view and go and find another view and then visually look between them. The property inspector, sometimes called the property palette, is designed to display key value pairs for the currently selected components, essentially the properties of the current components. Like the structure window, it is synchronized with the main document editor window and also the structure window itself. It provides additional dialogues and editors depending on the property type that you're editing in order to make editing these particular properties easier. Here we have the properties for the currently selected view department's output text. If I switch to the source code view, you can see that the view department's output text has an ID of OT5 and a value of view departments. If I change the value in the actual source code, you can see that it is reflected in the property inspector. This also works in the reverse fashion, basically meaning that the property inspector is another window that is synchronized with the main document window. You might note in the property inspector, against the properties that we've changed, we can see a little green circle. If we ever decide that we want to reset back to the default value, we can click the little drop down and say reset to default, and this will put it back to the default value for the property of that component. If we're having trouble finding a particular property for the current component, we can use the find facility, and we simply type in the name, and then you can see that JDeveloper will highlight the name of the property or the matches of the property within the current property inspector. For each of the properties, they have additional editors. So when we click the little download, little down arrow, and we click expression builder, this brings up an expression builder, which we can type in EL type expressions for deriving the current value of this component. Now the example I'm using here is quite trivial, but we can essentially use any EL expression here, or we can use one of the bindings created by the ADF model layer behind the scenes. Again, a bit beyond the purposes of this particular presentation, but just to show you that the facility exists. The log window is designed to show errors, warnings, and informational messages. These typically come from compiler and debugger, or other tools such as Apache Ant or the inbuilt auditor and profiler tools. The log window shown here is basically showing a lot of output from the IDE itself, various messages as the tool started up. However, if we were to go in and put, for example, a syntax error into our program and then right-click and run, we'd notice within the log window we get a separate window which will show us the compiler output. Here we can see the syntax error in our actual source code, and if we were to double click on that, it takes us back to the error in our code so we can go back and fix it. Often the messages within the log window can be a bit overwhelming, so you can either right click and find in order to search for a particular message, or alternatively you can right click and clear to clear the current output. So in today's ADF Insider Essentials series, we've had a very quick introduction to the concept of IDE, or the Integrated Development Environment, as well as managing the JDeveloper IDE windows and what the core 6 windows are for in the IDE. Hopefully for beginner programmers, this will reduce the confusion and overwhelming nature of the IDE when you first go in. If you're interested in learning more about JDeveloper, head to oracle.com/technology/JDev. There you'll find downloadable demos, tutorials, discussion forums, samples, the developer guides, and much more. Thanks for your time today, and I hope you can join me for another ADF Insider Essentials demonstration soon.